Thank God this show is over. It should have been cancelled years ago. Those were the explosive words that Prince Harry hurled at Stephen Colbert last night, setting off a chain reaction that would ultimately see the Duke of Sussex storm off the Late Show set in what insiders are calling the most dramatic guest walkout in television history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when two massive egos collide on live television. What started as what appeared to be a standard promotional appearance for Harry's latest charitable initiative quickly devolved into a verbal bloodbath that left the studio audience stunned into silence and Colbert's production team scrambling to figure out how to salvage what remained of the broadcast. The confrontation began brewing from the moment Harry stepped onto the iconic Late Show stage, his body language already suggesting this wasn't going to be the typical celebrity softball session viewers had come to expect. Colbert, known for his sharp wit and calculated provocations, seemed particularly charged last night, perhaps sensing an opportunity to probe deeper into the controversies that have surrounded the royal family member since his departure from official duties. The host's opening questions appeared innocuous enough, touching on Harry's recent humanitarian work and his life in California, but there was an underlying tension in his delivery that suggested he had bigger fish to fry. "So, Harry, you've been quite vocal about mental health awareness lately," Colbert began, his signature smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "It's interesting how you've positioned yourself as an advocate for transparency and healing, given some of the, shall we say, complicated family dynamics we've all witnessed play out in the media." The camera captured Harry's immediate shift in posture, his jaw tightening as he processed what was clearly intended as more than casual conversation. "I think it's important to note, Stephen, that advocating for mental health isn't a position I've taken lightly. It comes from real experience and genuine concern for people who are struggling." But Colbert wasn't content to let it rest there. "Absolutely, and I admire that. Though I have to wonder, and I think our audience is curious about this too, how do you reconcile being an advocate for healing and communication when your own family relationships seem to be, well, let's call them strained?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon, and Harry's response came with an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "I think that's a rather presumptuous question, Stephen. You're making assumptions about relationships you know nothing about based on tabloid speculation." "Fair enough," Colbert replied, clearly enjoying the pushback. "But these aren't exactly tabloid rumors when you and your wife have given multiple high-profile interviews detailing your grievances with the royal family. I mean, the Oprah interview alone was watched by, 50 million people? That's hardly keeping family business private." The audience began to sense the shift in atmosphere, the usual comfortable banter between host and guest, giving way to something much more confrontational. Harry's media training was evident as he attempted to redirect the conversation, but Colbert seemed determined to press his advantage. "Look, I came here tonight to talk about the work we're doing with veterans and mental health initiatives," Harry said, his voice carrying a warning tone that Colbert either didn't catch or chose to ignore. "I'm not here to relitigate family matters that have been discussed extensively elsewhere." Colbert leaned back in his chair, his expression suggesting he was just getting started. "But Harry, surely you can see how the public might find it difficult to separate your advocacy work from the very public way you've handled your family relationships. I mean, you've essentially built a brand around being the royal who tells the truth, the one who breaks the silence. But then, when questions get a little uncomfortable, suddenly it's off limits?" The accusation clearly struck a nerve, and for the first time since sitting down, Harry's carefully maintained composure began to crack. "I think you're confusing honesty with exploitation, Stephen. There's a difference between sharing your truth to help others and turning personal pain into entertainment." "Entertainment?" Colbert's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "That's an interesting choice of words, coming from someone who signed a multi-million-dollar deal with Netflix to, what was it, share your story with the world. I mean, if we're talking about turning personal pain into entertainment, you might want to look in the mirror." The studio fell silent, except for the hum of cameras capturing every micro-expression as Harry processed what amounted to a direct attack on his credibility and motivations. His hands, which had been resting casually on the chair arms, now gripped them with white-knuckled intensity. "I think you're deliberately misrepresenting the intention behind the work we're doing," Harry replied, his voice now carrying an unmistakable chill. "But then again, misrepresentation seems to be something of a specialty for you, doesn't it, Stephen?" The counterpunch landed with surgical precision, and Colbert's practiced smile faltered for just a moment before returning with renewed intensity. "Oh, that's rich coming from someone who's made a career out of rewriting history to suit his narrative. Tell me, Harry, when you're giving these speeches about truth and reconciliation, do you ever mention the part where you've essentially cut off half your family? Or is that detail not convenient for the brand?" At this point, the confrontation had moved well beyond typical late-night television territory. The audience, initially excited to witness some celebrity drama, now sat in uncomfortable silence as they watched two public figures systematically attempt to destroy each other's credibility on live television. Harry's response came slowly, deliberately, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. "Stephen, I find it fascinating that someone who makes their living mocking and belittling people from behind a desk would lecture anyone about family relationships. At least I have the courage to address my problems directly rather than hiding behind jokes and cheap shots." The words hit their target, and Colbert's facade finally began to crack in earnest. But just as the host opened his mouth to respond, something in Harry's expression shifted, suggesting that what had come before was merely the opening salvo in what was about to become an all-out war. What happened next would transform this already explosive encounter into something that television historians will be analyzing for years to come. Harry leaned forward, his voice dropping to a level that somehow made his words more menacing than if he had shouted them. "You know what, Stephen? I think it's time we talked about the real reason I'm here tonight. Not to promote any project or discuss my work, but because I wanted to look you in the eye and tell you exactly what I think about you and this pathetic excuse for a show." The studio audience, already on edge from the escalating tension, now sat in complete stunned silence. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze, unsure whether they should keep rolling or cut to commercial. Colbert, for perhaps the first time in his career, appeared genuinely caught off guard by the sheer audacity of his guest's declaration. "Excuse me?" Colbert managed, his voice betraying the first hints of genuine anger breaking through his professional veneer. "I think you might want to remember where you are right now, Harry. This is my show, my stage, and you're here because I invited you." Harry's laugh was cold, calculated, and utterly devoid of humor. "Your show? Stephen, let's be honest about what this really is. This is a platform for a bitter, aging comedian to take cheap shots at people who actually matter, while pretending to be some kind of intellectual authority. The fact that you've somehow convinced people that your brand of smugness passes for wit doesn't make you important." The personal nature of the attack seemed to flip a switch in Colbert, and his carefully constructed television persona began disintegrating in real time. "You want to talk about mattering? You're a grown man who threw a tantrum when he didn't get his way, and then spent years publicly trashing the institution that gave him everything he has. You've turned victimhood into a cottage industry, and now you have the nerve to come on my show and lecture me?" "Your show," Harry repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "Do you know what people really think about your show, Stephen? They think it's tired. They think you're a relic from a different era who's desperately clinging to relevance by attacking people who can't fight back. The only reason anyone still watches is because they're waiting for you to finally say something so offensive that you get canceled." The accusation clearly struck deep, because Colbert's response came with a venom that his audience had never seen before. "Canceled? That's rich coming from someone who's been trying to cancel his entire family for the past 5 years. You want to talk about offensive? How about publicly humiliating your grandparents, your father, your brother, all so you could play victim for American audiences who eat up your sob story?" "At least I'm honest about my problems," Harry shot back. "I don't hide behind jokes and pretend that making fun of people is the same thing as having principles. You've built your entire career on being cruel to people, and now you're upset because someone finally called you out for it." But Colbert wasn't finished. And what came next would push this confrontation past the point of no return. Honest, Harry, you wouldn't know honesty if it bit you on your privileged ass. You've rewritten history so many times that I don't think you even remember what actually happened anymore. You want to talk about cruelty? How about what you've done to your family? How about the way you've exploited your mother's death for sympathy? How about the way you've turned your brother into a villain because he got the job you wanted? The studio fell so quiet that the mechanical whir of cameras was audible as Harry processed what amounted to the most personal attack anyone had ever leveled at him on television. His face had gone pale, but his eyes blazed with a fury that made everyone in the studio instinctively lean back in their seats. "How dare you?" Harry said, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying more menace than a shout. "How dare you bring my mother into this? You don't know anything about my family, about what we've been through, about what I've sacrificed." Sacrificed? Colbert's voice rose to match the intensity of the moment. "What exactly have you sacrificed, Harry? Your title? Your duties? Your family? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you traded all of that in for money and fame in America. You didn't sacrifice anything. You made a business decision, and now you're angry because people see through the PR campaign." The exchange had moved so far beyond normal television boundaries that even the production crew seemed paralyzed, unsure whether to intervene or simply document what was clearly becoming a historic meltdown. Harry stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed amplified in the silence. "You want to know what I think about your sacrifices, Stephen? I think you're a bitter, talentless hack who's spent so long pretending to be clever that you've forgotten you're just a bully with a platform. The only reason anyone tolerates you is because you go after easy targets, but the moment someone fights back, you crumble." Colbert rose to meet him, abandoning any pretense of maintaining his host composure. "Easy targets? You mean like spoiled princes who throw tantrums when they don't get their way? Trust me, Harry, you're about as easy as they come. You've handed me more material than I could use in a lifetime just by existing." The two men now stood facing each other across the desk, the studio lights casting harsh shadows that made the scene look more like a boxing ring than a talk show set. The audience sat frozen, witnessing what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked about moments in television history. Harry's final words before the ultimate explosion carried a quiet intensity that somehow made them more devastating than anything that had come before. "You know what the truly pathetic part is, Stephen. After all these years, after all the jokes and all the supposed success, you're still just a scared little man desperate for approval, and everyone can see it except you." The silence that followed was deafening, but it wouldn't last long, because what came next would shatter any remaining pretense of civility and set the stage for the most dramatic exit in late-night television history. Colbert's response came like a verbal nuclear bomb, delivered with a coldness that shocked even his own production team. "You know what, Harry? You're absolutely right about one thing. I am desperate for approval, but at least I'm not desperate enough to sell out my own family for a Netflix check. At least I'm not so pathetic that I had to run away to another country because I couldn't handle being second best to my brother." The words hung in the air like poison, and for a moment, Harry seemed genuinely stunned by the sheer brutality of the attack. But when he responded, his voice carried a quiet fury that made everyone in the studio genuinely fear what might happen next. "Second best?" Harry's laugh was hollow, dangerous. "Stephen, you're projecting so hard right now that I'm starting to feel sorry for you. You want to talk about being second best? Your entire career is built on being a discount version of funnier, more talented people. You're not Jon Stewart. You're not even a pale imitation of him. You're just a sad middle-aged man who thinks being mean makes you relevant." But this time, Colbert was ready with a response that would cross every line of decency and professionalism. "At least I didn't abandon my duty when things got tough. At least I didn't turn my back on everything my family built because I was jealous of my older brother's success. And at least I didn't drag my wife into a vendetta against people who gave me everything I have." The mention of Meghan seemed to trigger something primal in Harry, and his composure finally shattered completely. "Don't you dare bring my wife into this. Don't you dare! You have no idea what we've been through. What we've had to endure because of people like you, who think our pain is entertainment. People like me? Colbert's voice rose to match Harry's intensity. I'm not the one who went on Oprah and threw my family under the bus for ratings. I'm not the one who wrote a tell-all book airing every piece of dirty laundry I could find. You did that, Harry. You made your pain into entertainment. And now you're mad because people are calling you out for it. The confrontation had now reached a fever pitch, with both men red-faced and gesticulating wildly. The studio audience sat in horrified silence, witnessing what would undoubtedly become one of the most infamous moments in television history. Harry took a step closer to Colbert's desk, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You want to know the truth, Stephen? The truth is that you're everything that's wrong with American media. You're a bully who hides behind jokes, a coward who attacks people who can't fight back, and a hypocrite who lectures others about morality while making millions off cruelty and division. And you're a spoiled brat who's never had to work for anything in his life, Colbert shot back, his own voice now shaking with rage. You're a man, child who threw a tantrum when he didn't get his way, and then spent years making everyone else pay for it. The only reason anyone cares about what you have to say is because of the family you've spent so much time trashing. What happened next would be replayed on social media for weeks to come. Harry, his face contorted with rage, reached across Colbert's desk and swept his arm across it, sending papers, coffee mugs, and Colbert's famous blue cards flying in all directions. The crash echoed through the studio like a gunshot. That's what I think of you and your pathetic show, Harry snarled, his chest heaving with the exertion of his outburst. You're nothing, Stephen. You're a joke, and everyone knows it except you. Colbert, now standing behind his destroyed desk, pointed a shaking finger at his guest. Security! Get this entitled brat out of my studio, before I do something I'll regret. You want to act like a child, Harry? Then you can leave like one. But Harry wasn't finished. As production assistants began moving toward the stage, he turned to face the stunned audience directly, his voice carrying clearly through the silent studio. You want to know why I really came here tonight? It wasn't to promote anything. It was to tell all of you that this show, this man, represents everything toxic about American entertainment. Stephen Colbert has made millions by being cruel, by dividing people, by making hatred seem funny. Get him out of here! Colbert screamed, his professional veneer completely abandoned. This is my show, my studio, and I want him gone now. Harry turned back to face his host one final time, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute finality. You're right, Stephen. This is your show. And thank God it's dying. Thank God people are finally seeing through your act. Thank God this show is over. It should have been canceled years ago. The quote that would become the headline of every entertainment website was delivered with such venom that several audience members audibly gasped. Harry then began his dramatic exit, walking purposefully toward the stage exit, while Colbert continued shouting behind him. Don't you walk away from me! Colbert yelled, his voice cracking with emotion. You don't get to come on my show, destroy my set, and then just leave. You're a disgrace to your family, to your country, to everything you claim to represent. But Harry didn't look back. He strode off the stage with his head held high, leaving behind a trail of destruction both literal and metaphorical. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or simply process what they had just witnessed. Colbert, standing alone behind his demolished desk, seemed to realize for the first time that the cameras were still rolling. His face was flushed, his hair disheveled, and his usually perfect composure completely shattered. He attempted to regain some semblance of control, but his voice betrayed the depth of his humiliation. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice barely steady, I apologize for what you just witnessed. This is not the kind of discourse we try to promote on this show. But even as he spoke the words, everyone could see that he was deeply shaken by the encounter. The aftermath was immediate and devastating. Within minutes of Harry's exit, social media exploded with clips of the confrontation, with hashtags like Colbert Meltdown and Harry Walkout trending worldwide. The destruction of Colbert's desk, Harry's final declaration about the show's cancellation, and the raw emotion displayed by both men created a perfect storm of viral content. What had started as a seemingly routine celebrity interview had devolved into something unprecedented in television history. Two public figures had systematically destroyed each other's reputations in real time, providing viewers with a raw, unfiltered glimpse behind the carefully constructed facades of modern celebrity culture. The confrontation exposed both men at their absolute worst. Harry's entitled rage and personal attacks revealed the petulant behavior that his critics had long suspected lay beneath his carefully crafted victim narrative. Meanwhile, Colbert's cruel taunts and loss of professional control showed a side of the beloved host that his fans had never seen before. As the cameras finally stopped rolling and the studio began to empty, one thing was clear. This wasn't just a celebrity feud or a publicity stunt gone wrong. This was a complete breakdown of two public figures who had allowed their personal animosities to override any sense of decency or professionalism. The dramatic exit that closed the confrontation would be remembered as one of the most shocking moments in late-night television history, a perfect encapsulation of how quickly careful public personas can crumble when faced with genuine conflict. Both men had revealed their true characters, and neither emerged with their reputation intact.